Alright, we're going live now. And we are live.
Okay.
Just let me know if you guys have any problems with the stream or anything like that. I'm gonna be focusing on making sure things are fine, so I might not talk as much.
Okay.
I'm just kind of on my phone, so I'll just be listening and talking when I have something to say.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hoppean BookClub. I'm Colton.
I'm emo doxed. I'm emo Hoppean.
I'm Kyle.
And I'm Mac or Kenzie Puff if you follow me over on Twitter.
I'm just gonna send out the link now to all the Discords and Twitter and stuff, so we can get started.
So hopefully everyone's good. So this week we are doing chapters 6 through 10. We're starting out with chapter 6, Credit Diverts Production. Where should we start? Yeah, I guess we can just start with this. So Hazlitt starts out by saying government encouragement to business is sometimes to be as feared as government hostility. And that's a very interesting distinction. He spends most of the chapter talking about loans, but at the end of the chapter he talks about subsidies even hurting businesses as a whole instead of society as a whole. And this is an interesting point to bring up, especially because as Kyle just pointed out, there are certain businesses that get subsidies from the government and have effects on society.
Right. A lot of businesses, a lot of times these will have to, toe whatever the government line they want to have, they want them to in order to get these subsidies.
And this is some of the corruption that Hazlitt talks about, although he probably didn't foresee social media companies coming into being.
Yeah, that turned out really well.
I think the market changes, but the problem kind of stays the same. You just have like different, I guess, degrees of this happening throughout the last century mostly. But I think the one that seems to be the most recurring is probably like the arms industry, because it's like been there for a while and it's always the one that depends the most on the government, or at least
it would seem
fairly
like
a lot.
It would seem like arms and the media would be probably the two worst ones for subsidies, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess in the long term, yeah. I mean, in the short term, you have, of course, you have industries that get more subsidies, but I think that if you just think about it in the long term, yeah, those two are probably the ones who have gotten the bigger slice.
Right.
And that's the thing, someone's always going to get the bigger slice, and that someone is usually, the most well-connected.
Yep. Hazlitt even talks about this later on in the chapter, about how government officials, because it's not their money they are giving out, they will give it out to friends or in return for bribes.
Right, and because it's not their money, they're not really risking anything.
Yeah, there's no incentive to spend the money well, as there would be if it were their actual money. Or if it were like a private investment where, you know, you have to make back that money.
Yep.
Right. When it's your money, you can like assess an individual on an individual level, and then if you feel that it's a good investment, you should take that risk. But when it's the government, you'll just for reasons of like say equality or something like that, you will just if all these private companies aren't giving them money and the government decides to give these people money, it's usually not based on any merit or any actual real credit of that person has.
Yeah, this is also like, I think, especially worse with democratic governments, and I think this is a point that Hoppe makes in Democracy, the God That Failed, which is when you have a government that's like a monarchy, you know, the government's money is kind of the monarch's money, so there's at least an incentive, like in the long run, since he's going to be there for a while, and his family is going to run the country after him. There's at least somewhat of an incentive for that money to be well spent. But when you have politicians who are going to sit there for 4 years and after they're gone, no one's even going to remember their name, that just doesn't exist at all.
Yep.
Right.
And Taco Salad even points out that ethanol was one of the biggest shams outside of the military industrial complex.
What is
Ethanol.
okay.
You know, what we all have to put on our cars now.
Yep. And look where that got us.
Yep, because we have to have those corn subsidies. Yeah. It's actually kind of interesting how Hazlitt continually puts off talking about inflation and just assuming that everything is going to be funded through taxation, even though in reality many of these policies are funded directly through inflation. Like,
yeah, I guess, I mean, since this book, I guess it's kind of old now. It wasn't that obvious back then, I would assume. So nowadays it's like clear as day that this is all being funded through debt. But since it's kind of old, you didn't, like, the US barely had any debt before World War II, so it wasn't as clear water as it is today.
Yeah, he does talk about debt, inflation in chapter 22, but it's just really odd. Like, even in a different chapter, he talks about how inflation is usually how they fund these things, but he just doesn't want to talk about it because he's saving it for chapter 22, which I think is really late in would be really late in the book if you were writing this book today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can, like I brought up in the last episode, we can see examples of that with, you know, the government printing out, or not necessarily printing out, but printing out $6 trillion and giving most of it to all these corporations and stuff to pick winners and losers in the economy.
Yep.
Mostly corporations that already exist and get subsidies. And yeah. And you can see that these businesses are going to be buying up all these other businesses that are going out of, you know, that are losing money and can't afford to pay their bills. It's basically a corporate takeover.
Yep. Yeah, and one of the funniest things I found in this chapter was the most frequent proposal is to give more credit to farmers, whether this be short-term, long-term, or intermediate-term credit. Which I found the intermediate credit to be funny, because it's like, if it's not short-term or long-term, like, what is it?
And the farmers thing is also kind of recurrent, but it's not as centralized as the arms and media problem, I would say, because, you know, you don't have like as big farming complexes. You have like farms spread all throughout the
Well,
country.
it depends. I guess on what country you're talking about, because here in America it goes from Oklahoma all the way to Indiana. With it's what, over 1,000 miles wide. And so it is fairly centralized, and you can see these problems that usually left-wing people talk about how Monsanto or some of these other big companies own all of the farms, and it's basically this corruption writ large in the farming industry as well.
Yeah, they're not wrong about that. They're not wrong. Honestly, as much as I hate leftists, they don't tend to be super wrong about like corporations and their power that
Yeah,
they get from the government.
yeah,
That's literally the only thing I can give them credit for at all.
yeah. They tend to be correct at seeing a problem, but they don't even understand how to make a solution because they don't understand the causes of the problem.
You're right.
I honestly feel like it kind of goes back to, I know y'all talked about this last episode, but it goes back to the original issue, which is people basically not being able to extend things to their logical conclusion. So they see that there's a problem with corporations being in bed with the government, but they can't take that to its logical conclusion and think, well, maybe government is part of the problem. Instead, they just talk about corporations and what they're doing wrong, but they don't understand the ways that they're actually connected practically.
Yeah, and this is why I don't think that government regulation of even social media companies will really help, because they're already in bed with the government, and why would the government allow their lapdogs to be regulated to where they're no longer useful to the government?
And it kind of goes both ways, I think, because, the people that are put in charge of the government, whether it's presidency or Congress, those people are supported by these companies. And without that support, they often don't get there. So it's hard to get someone who would actually be willing to solve the issue in the first place.
Yep, that's why the media has been called kingmakers in America for a long time.
Yep. I guess it's kind of like that issue of the Iron Triangle, if you've ever heard about that.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, go ahead and explain.
Okay, so the Iron Triangle is like I guess it's like a metaphorical way to explain the political dynamic of the U.S., where you basically have like a triangular relationship between Congress, bureaucracy, which is, I guess, the executive powers and legislative powers and stuff, and the interest groups, which are the corporations and other groups like think tanks and stuff like that, which are at the end of the day are all funded by corporations. And the metaphor just kind of goes like, so the interest groups give electoral support for Congress, then Congress gives funding and political support to the bureaucracy, and then the bureaucracy gives low regulation and special favors to the interest groups. And then the other way around it goes, that the interest groups gives congressional support via lobby to the bureaucracy, which gives policy choices and execution to Congress, and then Congress gives friendly legislation and oversight to the interest groups. And that's how they all keep each other at the top. So it's basically, the issue of lobbying and how it affects policy, but it goes both ways, because the corporations are responsible for putting people there, and the people being put there are responsible for keeping the corporations powerful.
Yep, this is
Yeah.
basically regulatory capture, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate to what's going on.
and I guess it's called the iron triangle because there's not really an obvious or at least simple way of breaking it.
Mm.
Yeah,
Apparently
that's
apparently looking at the Wikipedia page for it, because I wanted to get the image. It was used as early as 1956, so it's not a particularly new terminology either.
hmm.
So I guess it just shows how far back this issue really dates.
Oh, when people first noticed it, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so these loans that the government tries to give to people who don't have enough credit, or at least in their eyes don't have enough credit, these kind of loans only come up in two cases. The first is to have the farmer hold his crop off market, and the second is to provide capital. Now, it's kind of interesting that Hazlitt always has to keep on doing this. He's setting off the first case until he talks about government commodity controls, and it just shows you how embedded all of these issues are with each other.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. I'm just putting the image of the iron triangle thing on the stream so the people can see it. Like
Okay.
the drawing thing with all the names. You can go on now.
Okay. Now, at first glance, providing capital to people who don't have credit seems good. You can have a poor family that can't buy a farm or can't buy better farming equipment to be more productive. And so the government comes in and buys the farm or the equipment and helps the community out through that poor family's added output. But we should notice that this already happens with private credit. The distinction between private credit and government credit is by basically what the this isn't the only distinction, but the private lender risks his own funds while the government isn't going to do the same thing as the private lender would do. The private lender wants to get all of his funds back, while the government
Doesn't need to.
it doesn't need to. And so even if it was trying to, it would only be doing what private capital would be doing anyways. And so there has to be some other reason for the government to be doing it. And so the whole argument is that the government will lend, private lenders will not. Now, what is being lent is the farm or the tractor, and what is lended to A cannot be lent to B. So A is the person who would get the farm or tractor should the government not intervene. The banks or lenders know him and his record. They want to find employment for their funds, and they know he is a good farmer and keeps his word. And so they will lend to him because they want that return on investment. They want to employ their funds. Yeah. And now
Okay, I was just looking at this. I was just looking at the stream, and it was lagging pretty hard on my TV, so that distracted me for a second.
Yeah,
Okay.
it looks like we're having a little bit of a connection issue, but it doesn't seem to be on my end. I think YouTube is having a bit of a aneurysm. Because
Okay.
on my end it says that my connection is great.
Yeah.
And we only have 2% dropped frames, so...
Okay.
Okay, do we have any comments saying anything about the audio?
No.
Not really. Nope.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, now YouTube says the connection is excellent again, so I guess you may continue.
Okay. So actually, we basically stopped at the point where I thought this was another funny part of the chapter. Hazlitt basically calls out what he calls monetary cranks that think that credit is something a banker gives to a man. Instead, it is something a man already has. He has it perhaps because he has marketable assets of greater value than the loan he is asking for, or he has it because of his character and past record have earned him the credit. A, as we already described, is simply trading a less liquid form of asset credit for a more liquid form. And that is why the banker makes him the loan. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was just
I
paying
heard that,
attention
sorry.
to the stream, like fixing the stream.
Yeah, I was reading the comments as well and was waiting to see if anyone had something to say on it.
Yeah, I changed the color
Yeah,
of the text, so hopefully it's easier to read now, because Falnost said that it was a little bit hard to see.
Okay.
that looks pretty good out. Yeah, that yellow contrasts with the blue pretty well.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah, I always felt like that the credit when I read that the first time, I felt that was pretty obvious. Like even though I still am not that economically literate. Like this is all me trying to learn anyway as we go. But when that struck out to me as like people think that's retarded.
Yeah, we can see that when the people at the Fed talk about credit expansion, they say they're giving credit to poor families. The whole Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac back in the early 2000s. Regulations
I'm
about
sure.
subprime mortgages.
Uh and then that's part of why the housing market crashed. They weren't
Um,
able to.
it was part of the reason why. Um, that's a complicated discussion,
Okay.
Yeah.
but I just thought I'd bring up the fact that they basically do make this failure distinction. It's kind of this failure of distinction is kind of comes from the fact, as we discussed last week, that people use money and they don't think of the money as representing real assets.
Yeah, that's a good point. We talked about it last week when we were talking about war and the broken
Yep.
windows.
Yep. And so, the amount of money that is produced by a tire manufacturer, the money is actually just representing the amount of tires they produce.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you need to think about. And why is the bank, lending out to us and if they're not getting anything in return? And really, this trade of less liquid versus more liquid is actually what's going on. So, okay.
Maybe we should go to the next chapter then.
You think
Yeah, I didn't
we're
have
done with
anything
this
to say
one?
to that.
Yeah, I
we're
think
done
there's
with
not
this one?
much else we can cover on this one. I mean, it's kind of a long chapter, I guess, but I think
The
we
next
talked
chapter
about
is
it.
the long one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, chapter 7, which is The Curse of Machinery.
Okay. So Hazard actually calls this one of the most viable delusions that machines on net balance create unemployment, and that this fallacy is the basis of many labor union practices. And I actually really like that we're finally getting to labor unions, because I have a special hatred for labor unions.
And he talks more about those labor unions specifically in chapter 8.
Yep.
This chapter is it's just more focused on explaining like the actual problem, which is the several centuries old idea that technological progress creates unemployment. And it's not really well founded at all. And I think it should be clear as day by now, but somehow it isn't.
Yeah, I really, when I got to the title of this chapter, I haven't read this book since 2016. It's been a while. I forgot that he had so sassily laid out that in order for that to be true, you would have to look at essentially the entire rest of history and try to claim that it was taking jobs away from just because it was allowing people to be more productive and to get more labor done in the jobs that they were actually doing. So when you put it out that obviously, it really does not make any sense if you consider all the innovation that humans from the beginning of civilization have built and created to help them with the jobs that they're doing. It just doesn't make any sense to all of a sudden now in modern day, just because technology looks different, to think, well, it's going to take the jobs of people and people aren't going to be productive now because they're not going to want to do anything. Doesn't make sense whatsoever.
Right. I particularly enjoyed reading this chapter because, one, it's a big slap in the face to Andrew Yang.
I thought of him, and I actually thought of Tucker Carlson as well, because that's one thing that he is not so great on either, for whatever reason. I guess because he grew up in Silicon Valley, he just thinks that technology is just going to take jobs away from people, and jobs won't exist anymore. I don't understand.
Yeah, I'd actually kind of forgotten that Tucker Carlson shares those opinions to some degree. But I mean, it's just nonsense, because when you have a technological improvement, then you have to have people that are going to make whatever that item is. You have jobs to create these machines, and people that have to learn how to do different things to make that machine, to put it together, all this stuff, and then you have to have people that work whatever that machine is. So it takes jobs away in the sense that maybe say like typewriters are gone, and that now that there's computers, now people have to learn how to make a computer and all that. So jobs are lost, but then they're also created at the same time.
Yeah, it's not that they're lost, it's just that they're displaced to different area of the market. And that happens for a lot more reasons than just technology. But if anything, technology first and foremost takes away the most physical labor intensive jobs, which are often also some of the riskiest. So if in the long run you are benefiting by not having people, by having people have to do less dangerous jobs.
Yep. And just going back to the Tucker Carlson, Taco Salad said, according to Tucker, the Austrian school runs everything, which I kind of wish was true.
Yeah.
Same.
Cato runs a lot more.
What's funny about Tucker specifically is that while he may be critical of technology and technological advancements and how they affect the market, he also seems particularly fond of countries such as Japan. I mean, I have seen him talk positively about Japan in more than one occasion, and Japan is one of the most technologically advanced countries on Earth at this time.
Yep.
Maybe they take it a little bit too far. I mean, I'm not sure I support some of the things they have over there, but it's a completely different world. They have different demands and stuff. I don't think a lot of what works for them would work in the West. But yeah, that's a different conversation. It certainly has benefited them, and that's, I think, obvious.
Right, and I think there's an example that Hazlitt keeps on going back to in the book of the stocking frames. That he talks about a riot that comes in, that where about 10,000 stocking frame machines were destroyed, houses were burned, investors had to flee for their lives, and order was not restored until the military was called in. And I thought that was somewhat ironic that I was reading it while riots were happening.
Yeah.
And just how riots used to be handled versus how they are now handled.
Quote unquote handled.
Yeah. Yeah, and the story of the stocking industry actually goes to show that some of the complaints that the technophobes have all justified. There was many handicraft workers and their families that had personal tragedies and that didn't really end for 40 years. But to focus just on them is a mistake because it allowed the rest of society to progress. And Hazlitt actually wraps up the book saying that there's not the book, the chapter, saying that there is personal tragedies whenever industrial economic progress is made. That what was that a person spent many years learning a skill, getting good at it, and then all of a sudden it's obsolete, and he has to learn a new skill, and in the meantime he is an unskilled laborer.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Okay.
You cut out for me for a second.
Okay. So when technological or industrial, not technological, in economic or industrial progress is made, a certain class of job or worker is made obsolete. And these people have been spending many, many years getting good at that skill that is now no longer needed by society. And so it's a personal tragedy that they went from a skilled worker to an unskilled worker almost overnight. And it is,
Yeah.
but, and so they have to learn a new skill in order to go from being unskilled in anything that's worthwhile to being skilled in something that's valued by society. And so, but this is not just because of technological advancements. It's basically any industrial or economic progress.
It's basically any, shift in the market, or in at least in the demand for labor. It can happen for several different reasons, like a person who spent most of their adult life being a soldier in the military. If there's suddenly no more need for soldiers because all the wars are over, that person's gonna have to learn to do something new. I mean, it's kind of a personal tragedy, I guess, but honestly, I don't really see how it's an issue on, federal level.
Yeah, and it's, well, this is kind of what Hazlitt talks about. Yes, it's a personal issue, but this is looking at the short-term effects on a special interest group, when you should be not just looking at that, but you should also be looking at the country as a whole in the long run.
Right, and I think this also goes back a little bit to the public works the public works projects, saying like, you know, when construction workers need a job and they decide, and the state decides, oh well, we're going to build a bridge so you can have a job, and you know, for reasons aside, you know, instead of learning a new skill, these workers are just diverting their resources and time to something that's really not even needed when they could be learning a new skill.
Yep. Taco
Yeah,
salad
and
actually.
if you're just gonna, you know, like there's not really an alternative to it when you think about it. Like, are you just gonna
Unless you
stop
want.
progress so people don't have personal inconveniences?
Yes. No.
Yep, that's what I was about to say. So, Taco Salad actually brings up something about the riots, is that CNN, while its headquarters are being sieged, was still trying to call it peaceful protests, and MSNBC called them peaceful protests, while a building was on fire in the background.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I saw the video of the reporter talking about it while a building was on fire behind him.
Yes, these
Yeah,
are very orderly protests. There's
It's
literally
really like
a building on fire.
it was such a that specific clip of MSNBC is just such a metaphor for everything the media has been doing for decades to people. Like standing in front of a burning building going, "Please disperse. There's nothing to see here.
yeah, I was about
What
to
you
ask.
see is not what's happening."
Yeah,
Ironic.
I was wondering what movie that was from. Where the guy gets on the bullhorn and is just like, "There's nothing to see here. Please disperse."
Oh yeah. I don't remember.
Ironically, while I was at my friend's birthday party, their parents were talking about how the police arresting CNN was a communistic act, and I was trying to hold back so hard.
Wait, the
Yeah.
police were what?
The police arresting journalists from CNN and wherever else, that was a communistic act, and I was just trying so hard to hold back.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if CNN didn't rile these people up, you know, it wouldn't be the same thing. So
Yeah. They kind of had it coming. Am I allowed to say that?
I think so. But
Okay.
anyway,
In
journalists need to
Minecraft?
learn how to code.
yeah,
But
and good.
journalists need to learn how to code.
Okay.
They're obsolete now.
Yeah, we
Uh,
should push for technological progress so we can make journalism obsolete as soon as possible. That would be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Well,
Taco Salad says Naked Gun was the movie.
oh yeah, that's right.
Um. Okay, and I think we should um start talking about the make work rules and feather bed practices by labor unions. If anyone doesn't know, feather bedding is the practice of hiring more workers than are needed to perform a given job, or to adopt work procedures which appear pointless, complex, and time-consuming merely to employ additional workers.
Yeah. This is basically what the next chapter is about. And it goes
No.
in depth about labor unions too.
This says, okay, I might have my notes mixed up because this says it's part of this chapter.
No, I mean chapter 8.
Yeah. But chapter 7 apparently also goes into this.
Oh yeah? Shit. I forgot.
They probably run into one another.
Yeah,
They
sort of. Because the chapter 8 is kind of like a conclusion to the problem posed in chapter 7. And it talks about like spreading the work in the division of labor and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is in chapter 7, where he talks about Colin Edwards testifying on behalf of the DOJ to the Temporary National Economic Committee. And Like he brings up many examples of feather bedding. An electrical union in New York City refused to install electrical equipment made outside of New York City unless the equipment was disassembled and reassembled at the job site. In Houston, plumbers would not install prefabbed pipe unless one end of the pipe had the threads cut off and threaded again at the job site. A Teamsters union in New York required any trucks entering the city to have a local driver as well as the driver already employed to drive the truck. And painters unions imposed restrictions on spray guns to slow down the painting process. And
Major
all
bro
these
moment.
policies are
yeah, and this is kind of goes into what he talks about in chapter 10, but this is when you prioritize employment over production, because all of these things obviously lower the amount of production society is creating
Yeah.
just to create more employment. And as going with the sassy comment that Mac had, he even talks about, why should we even employ trains to move equipment from Chicago to New York when we could employ many more men to carry it on their backs?
Yeah, I loved throughout the last chapter and this one that we're going over now, he'll put things in parentheses with like little side notes or say, well, if that's the case, why don't we just carry everything around with our bare hands then so we have more work? And this chapter was infuriating to me because having worked retail and having worked in service industries, there are absolutely things like this happening where you know for a fact that 2 or 3 people could get it done, but there will be 6 or 7 of you just because you know that they probably have to employ that many people because of some arbitrary rule. And it's so infuriating because it's not efficient and it just makes everybody's job harder. So there's lower productivity too.
Yep. And he even goes into a little bit of this later on when he talks about labor saving devices, where they either reduce the cost of the products that are being made, or they increase the productivity of the workers, and thus the workers get paid more. And so it's more productivity actually just benefits society, which should be obvious, but you have to tell people this.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of goes into like the like kind of Marxist idea that, you know, work has an inherent value, or that the value depends on how much work you do, when in reality it only really depends on how much your work is demanded. And
Yep.
that's important because, you know, if you have increased productivity, you know, you're getting more things done in the same amount of time. That means companies are going to be able to profit more, they're going to be able to have more wealth, and they'll be able to pay their employees more. But when you're working for someone, you're basically, you know, renting your time and effort. So the amount of work that you do doesn't really matter that much, like in terms of your actual salary. It's gonna affect your salary is gonna be affected dependent on how the company is doing. So if the company produces more, you may get a raise, but you know, like directly, it's not really like your salary doesn't depend on how much you're able to produce for most jobs, because for most jobs you have a contract and you are paid based on the time that you work.
Yep, wage labor, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it sounds like somebody took the labor theory of value and they're just like, okay, so we're going to make laws that force people to work harder than they have to so they can get paid more and keep their job. And it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yep.
Yep.
And it's kind of interesting that he spends the first half of this chapter talking about mountains of figures, And then he opens up the second section saying one might pile up mountains of figures to show how wrong the technophobes were, but it would do no good unless we understood clearly why they were wrong. For statistics and history are useless in economics unless accompanied by a basic deductive understanding of facts. And this actually kind of shows the difference between more Austrian, the Austrian school and more empiricist schools of economics, where the Austrian school wants to start with a foundation, which is praxeology, and then build up on top of that. And only because the argument is you can only understand facts and figures once you have a clear understanding of the theory.
Right.
So, do you want to talk about unions now?
Go
I
off,
know you
Colton.
want to. I can tell.
I don't know if there's anything else that we should really talk about, because I mean we already kind of pointed to some of these things. I'm just kind of going through. Actually, there is something to talk about. There is a sense in which jobs. So he talks about how machines don't necessarily increase the amount of jobs overall. They can increase jobs in a certain industry, but it's not necessarily true that if you have a label-saving device, it increases the amount of jobs in the economy.
Yeah.
However, there isn't a sense in which machines have increased jobs enormously, and it is said that machines have allowed us to have much larger populations than we did in the Middle Ages. And we not only employ our employment to machines, but also our lives, because they have allowed us to have just larger populations.
Yeah, I guess at this point we are basically dependent on them. You could argue that's not a great thing. That's a completely different conversation, but we need to keep them working. We need to keep them running. And that in itself is a lot of work.
Yep. Yeah, I think that is done. With one other note. He actually does kind of call out how absurd these theories are. He says theories as false as these are never held with logical consistency. And it's just the sassiness that he has throughout this entire chapter, which I found hilarious.
Yeah. It's one of the good things about this book overall. It's not a very, dense book. It's kind of lighthearted in a lot of ways, which makes it easy to digest.
Yep. It's definitely made for a lay audience. It's not just a pure theoretical book where you're reading the same paragraph 5 times to try to figure out what it means.
Yeah.
Human action.
Yep, I was thinking the Austrian science and the economic science and the Austrian method by Hans Hermann Hoppe. That is such a dense book to read, even though it's only 86 pages.
I'm still waiting on that copy to arrive. It was supposed to get here 20 minutes ago, but it won't be arriving till tomorrow.
Oh
Yep.
no.
It's fine.
Yep. Yeah. In chapter 8, he starts by talking about union makework and feather bedding schemes. These practices and the public toleration of them spring from the same fundamental fallacy as the fear of machines, which I guess is why he talked about them in the previous chapter. It's a belief that a more efficient way of doing things destroys jobs, and its necessary correlation that a less efficient ways of doing things create jobs.
I mean, I guess,
embedded-
like we said, technically it does. It just doesn't mean that it's necessary or that it's the best jobs.
Well, it's reducing production will reduce our standard of living, and thus it will make us poor as a country. For instance, China and Russia, during the time of the writing of this, were much poor in absolute terms, and in relative terms, but they had less unemployment than America. And the reason why this can be true is employment doesn't dictate how much production and therefore your standard of living. The actual production dictates your standard of living.
Yeah, because if you have more production, you're gonna have cheaper cost of living, and that's good for basically everybody, regardless of how much
Yep.
money you have. And that goes into how often when you just try to analyze the economy of a certain country by looking at these kinds of numbers, you miss some certain things. And people often focus too much on comparing one class to the other instead of focusing on, okay, how well is the country doing as a whole?
Yeah. It's almost it's tautological that the more production there is, the higher the standard of living, because we have to remember that production is not just measured in money, it's measured in real things and the exchange of real things. And so when you have more production, there's more to go around, and therefore everyone will have more things.
Yep.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and to that point, at the end of the chapter, I like that he points out that one of the greatest fallacies is that there's only a fixed amount of work to be done, and that's why we have to spread the work around, because otherwise no other work will exist. As if we're not going to find more work to do or create other things that we have to work on. It'll just all come halting to a stop, and it doesn't make any sense if you think about it.
Yep.
That was exactly the next point in my notes. Because he starts and ends the chapter here with a restating of what the arrows are. And so, and he even points out that unless every human need and wish is fulfilled, and cannot be fulfilled with more work, that there will always be more work to be done.
I mean, it would be great if every human wish could be fulfilled with a little work, because I mean, we wouldn't have to do anything then.
Yep.
This is
people
not
still have
how it is.
Yeah, and
people still have to eat.
Yep.
So food still has to be made.
No,
animals still have to be.
Yeah, even if you had, the essential things covered, say you have completely automated food production and water distribution and all of the very essential goods and services covered, completely automated, what would happen is you would have an increase in demand in other things like arts and literature and non-essential things. So the demand would just be shifted, because people would have more time. They wouldn't have to worry about eating and drinking. They would go spend their time enjoying something else, spending their money with other things or their less essential things. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and the feather bedding examples that he gives are bricklayers not being able to use stone set aside for the chimney that is left for the stonemasons, electricians not being able to rip a board out to fix a connection and put it back, and a carpenter, that will require a carpenter. A plumber can't remove a tile to fix a leak in the shower and then put it back. That requires a tile setter. And so you get all these fights over jurisdictional jobs, essentially. And what this obviously does is reduce production, because it raises production costs.
Yeah.
And so instead of having your shower fixed and buying a sweater, you don't have the money for the sweater anymore because of how much the shower costs. And so you don't own. So the day of labor for both the plumber and the tile setter is costing the day of labor for someone who makes sweaters.
Yeah, and like the more, I guess, specific a certain job is, the more decentralized it has to be, I guess, or at least split among more people. Because if you have a lot of really, really simple jobs, you can have people who know how to do more than one thing. And often with, physical labor, that's the case. So if you have like construction workers, you don't hire someone just to put bricks in place, someone just to make cement, and someone just to carry sandbags. Those workers, they do several different things as a part of their work. When you have more specific works, more complex works, that's usually not the case, or at least not to the same extent. And that's a good thing, because when you have more basic work, the probability of it having a higher demand is greater, because it's simpler, so it's more common. And then having people who are able to do multiple things is good, because you're gonna have to hire less people. You can have one person you can say like fix your shower, paint your walls, and wash your kitchen, whatever. That can all be done by a single person. While you can have, like, for instance, just to give an absurd example, you can have a single person design and construct an entire rocket, for instance.
Okay, so you're basically talking about the division of labor then.
Yeah. And that's the thing with, trying to artificially allocate work. You're never going to be able to decide, like, how many people exactly is like the optimal amount of people to work on a certain thing. That's something that has to be decided by whoever's hiring and whoever's being hired.
Yep. Flintlock says that the creation of these feather-bedded jobs create negative externalities which affect the market in many seen and unseen ways, things that can often lead to a general decrease in wages. And actually, you can see this in the National Railroad, which decided, because of the unionization of railroads, that each class of employees has a particular job to do, and if one class does the job of another class, that person will have to be paid an extra day's worth of work, and anyone furloughed or fired from the other class will also have to be paid a day's worth of wages. And so this is basically why, this is an example of why unions can't fire people that are bad, because there's this rule that they would have to be paid for work anyway, so might as well keep them employed.
Yeah, and this goes into, I think he goes into greater detail and examples of this in the next chapter, which is disbanding troops and bureaucrats. Because I'm pretty sure he mentions, he goes back to the war example and talks about the benefits and the problems of maintaining an army, and how that affects employment and wages and the economy.
Yep. He even talks about what people are talking. He even talks about people wanting to cut the hourly work week from 40 hours. And so, which is actually something that's entirely different. Today we have the fight for 15, but it seems like back then they had the fight for 30.
$30?
No, 30 hours of work a week instead of.
Okay.
Yeah.
$30 minimum wage would be really funny, to say the least.
Yep. I mean, I would get a pay raise. But yeah, no, it's and so he has to deal with these two different options that you could argue for. You could have hours but not get a wage increase, so they only get 75% of the wages that they would normally get. And he just shows that this is a subsidization of the people who are already working to the people who are formerly unemployed. And then he also talks about a 1/3 pay increase and the effects of that. Go ahead, Kyle.
So basically welfare, I was just gonna comment.
Yep, it's basically subsidization, and he even talks about the assumptions that we would have to make to even say that it's subsidization, because you'd have to assume that the people who are unemployed are just as efficient as the people who are currently employed. You'd also have to assume that all industries have the same level of unemployment.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, just one quick thing that's probably worth mentioning is just, when you're artificially allocating or having an institution or allocate work, you're also going against people's free will to decide what they want to work with and how much they think their own work is worth. Because you're basically like having people be told, no, you have to do this for this much.
but you don't. But won't someone think of the poor?
That's basically what happened in like the Soviet Union. They would have, the government would decide what people have to work and when. And what ended up happening as a result of that, and this is kind of unrelated to the book, but I guess it's worth mentioning since we care about this. But what ended up happening was the government would actively use this power of allocating work to disrupt the family, to disrupt the culture. So in the Soviet Union, what would happen is the workers in the same household would be deliberately given different work hours so that they wouldn't be at home together to have family time. And what eventually happened because of that was the weekend was essentially abolished, because you would have resting days, but your family would be working while you weren't. So it's also even like despite just being bad for the economy, it's also really dangerous.
Yeah, that sounds very psychologically dangerous as well.
No, yeah, they literally did that in the Soviet Union. It was like a deliberate effort to make to jeopardize the family.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure there's a good article about this specific topic on the Mises Institute. I read it a long time ago, so sorry if it's not exactly correct, but I think it was called something like the abolition of the weekend or something among those lines. The end of the weekend, something like that. I don't remember exactly. I read it a really long time ago. But yeah, it basically went into detail how the power to allocate work was used against the family.
Yeah, I think I found it. It's called "When the Communists Abolished the Weekend."
Oh yeah, that's it.
I think that's what it is. Haven't read it, but
no, I'm pretty sure it's that one. I don't think there's a lot of essays or a lot of articles in that specific topic. It was a good article though. You should read it if you have the time.
Yep. Yeah, no, I put the link in chat. Yeah. And so yeah, just kind of getting back to what Hazlitt argued then. He does even talk about a third increase in hourly wages that is also argued by the unionists, because they realized that if they just cut work hours, that the workers would just get 75% of their pay, and they didn't want that. They wanted to basically have their cake and eat it too, in that sense. And it's kind of obvious that this would lead to mass unemployment, because you're basically pricing workers out of employment. So the least efficient firms would go under because they can't survive, and the least efficient workers would also be fired, just because their productivity wouldn't be high enough to justify the increase in pay.
Yeah. I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah, me neither.
Yep. And he does end the chapters by saying, in a modern economy, the most work will be done when prices, costs, and wages are in best relations to each other. And if you don't know anything about economics, that's going to just sound very vague. But what he's basically means is that when businesses are, the most work will be done when business is profitable. And by just increasing production costs, it's not going to make more work happen.
Because it's going to reduce profits. And
Yep.
reducing profits reduces reinvestment into the market, which
And
reduces hiring more workers.
Yep. And
Yeah.
that's also true, Mario. Just a shout out to the comment section or chat. Okay. And this leads us to chapter 9, which I think is something that, instead of kind of shifting our focus away from leftists that love unions, he's kind of shifting it towards the right Hegelians that really love troops and just want to have as many troops as possible.
Yep. This is goes back to hit Keynes in the face one more time. Because
Yep.
why
Yeah.
not?
Can you explain right Hegelianism, because I've heard the term, but I don't actually know what that is.
So the Hegelian dialect is when you have when you control what two sides are able to speak in society. So let's say you're CNN, and let's just, for simplicity's sake, say CNN is the only media that people watch.
Right.
So if you're CNN, you get to control who comes onto your broadcast, and so you can pick who is on one side and who is on the other. And since people typically decide left and right, you have the left Hegelians and the right Hegelians. And so if you really want the left side to win, you would bring out the strongest supporters of the left-wing politics that you can, and you would get some mealy-mouthed, moderate right-winger. And you would have a debate between these two people.
Yep.
And what happens when people see a debate, especially if it within the Overton window, is that they tend to moderate between the two sides. And so if you can slowly shift where the debate is happening to one side or the other, you will basically be able to shift the population.
Yeah, they can shift public opinion by making one side appear far stronger than the other.
Yep. And so this is why the media are called kingmakers, because if you get the weak proponents of one issue and the strong proponents of the opposite, you can make the country moderate between those two and go in the middle. So you would have, let's say, some moderate Republican who's like, well, too much regulation is bad, but we should have some regulation because the market can't control itself. And then you would bring out a strong left-winger that just wants to nationalize everything. Well, the people are going to moderate between those two positions and go, well, we should have a strong regulatory state, and
Yeah,
we should know that a strong regulatory state will cause many issues in the market, and so the left-wing politicians will always have something to rail against, and then you would have even more moderates that would say, okay, we can loosen up regulations a bit, but we really need a lot of these regulations because of because otherwise you get all these other bad things happening, and so you get more and more regulation until it's basically nationalized, and then the debate becomes, should this thing that is like 95% nationalized through regulation just be outright nationalized?
yeah.
Hmm.
And this issue of shifting public opinion, you mentioned CNN as an example. If CNN were the only TV channel in the U.S., here in Brazil, that's actually a lot closer to like the reality than in the U.S. because here we have national TV, and there's only like a handful of channels. But there is one channel which is Rede Globo, which is like disproportionately more powerful and more influential than all of the others. And of course, they get subsidies from the government. The other ones do as well, but not to the same extent, as far as I'm concerned. And right now, they are directly opposed to the government, to Bolsonaro's government, and I won't get into the merits and criticism of that, but it just really shows how prominent that issue is, because if you watch the news while you're eating lunch or whatever, you will see this. They will put like a 10-second clip of the president saying something, and then they will get like 5 other people from the far left is in an interview just dunking on it constantly. And it's hard for you to counter that, especially since they just chose the clip that they wanted from the president, and then they just invited the people that they wanted to talk against him. And when you have a TV network of that magnitude doing that on a national scale, you could see why it's easily able to affect, to shift public opinion.
And we have this in America too, but it's less obvious.
Yeah, you do. It's just incredibly obvious here. Like if you watch the news, it's hard for you to not want to just turn off the TV if you're actually aware of what's going on.
So 93% of all mainstream journalists graduate from Princeton University. And so you get this one ideological center in the country that is basically creating all the journalists.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so instead of having like one news station that is controlling everything, you just have like this one ideological center that is controlling everything through many media outlets.
Yep. Here are we have a lot of federal universities, at least one big federal university for each state. So technically the government is the one who's controlling where the intellectuals come from and where the journalists come from. And what happens is some of these some groups within these universities, like some sections of the universities, which do have power, like institutional power, they are able to be actively funded by parties. And the biggest student organization is like partnered with the literal Communist Party. Just so you can get an idea of like the magnitude of the problem.
Yep. Sounds. Yeah, it's. But anyways, that's what a right Hegelian is. It's basically the right-wing people that you see on TV. This would be the Sean Hannitys of the world and such things.
Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, people like that.
Yep.
Terrible people.
Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question.
That does. Thank you.
So chapter 9 is disbanding troops and bureaucrats, and he doesn't actually talk about the troops much, but the troops and the bureaucrats are basically the same argument. And so let's just get it on with the troops. After every war, it is said that there won't be enough jobs of servicemen if we disbanded the troops that were raised for the war. It is true that private industry might take some time to reabsorb the men when millions of them are released back into private life. This is kind of the seen in the unseen again. They see the troops being released into the labor market, but they don't see where people will get the money to employ them. If we assume the budget is balanced, the answer is clear. Since the government will no longer be taxing the public for the upkeep of the army, the public will have more money to spend and thus increase employment. Yeah. And if the government is funded by an unbalanced budget, then that is by government borrowing and other forms of deficit financing. This case is somewhat different. He's going to address deficit financing in a later chapter. But if there was any benefit to deficit spending, then the same deficit can be maintained while disbanding the troops and lowering taxes. So it's going to basically be the balanced budget case. And this is true because the troops disbanding will not merely be there's another case. The troops disbanding will not merely be supported by civilians in another way, but they will be self-supporting because they will have their own jobs. After the war, the troops that were raised to fight the war are no longer needed as the security threat is no longer present and the army should contract to pre-war size.
Yeah, and keeping those troops employed, you're just harming the economy, harming your own country because they could be working as something else that's actually needed.
Yep.
So you're reducing production, and by reducing production, you're reducing wealth.
Yep. And so the troops, if they stay in the army, will be unproductive and thus waste their resources. But if the army is contracted, those former troops will help increase production, and then therefore the wealth of everybody will be higher.
Yeah. And I guess the bureaucrats is the same argument, it's just a different example.
Yep. Critiques of but critics of reducing the bureaucracy have a different argument. They claim it is deflationary and you're reducing the purchasing power of federal employees by letting them go.
Good.
I was about to say the same thing.
I was thinking Mac would actually say that, not Kyle, but yep.
Learn to code. Again.
The fallacy comes by looking only at the immediate effects of the policy on a small group of society. It is forgotten that the taxpayer's income and purchasing power will go up by the same amount that the government officials go down. So Washington, D.C. may be less prosperous and can support less businesses, but other towns can support more.
Yeah.
And the matter... Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. What's to stop these bureaucrats from getting a job in the private sector in the first place and being productive?
Yeah.
Nothing. That's actually an argument that he goes into.
And there's also the thing which I'm pretty sure I mentioned last week on the first episode, which is, when you have things going through the government, you have to cover the government's expenses. So it's always going to be more expensive than if it didn't go through the government. And by letting all those people go, like all those bureaucrats, you're reducing the need for taxation and tariffs and things like that,
Yeah,
which
and
is ultimately good for like the entire economy.
Yeah, and that was actually a chapter from last week.
Yeah.
Talking about taxes discourage production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to like recap that.
And actually, I like how Hazlitt puts Emo's point. Instead of being parasites, they are now productive because they have to seek private jobs and provide for themselves.
Yep.
He does. Go ahead, Mac.
Oh, I was just gonna say about the taxes and production point. I like the point that he makes, and I think this was actually in an earlier chapter, but I'm not sure. But I had wrote it down to bring it up that he says people begin to ask themselves why they should work 6, 8, or 9 months of the entire year for the government and only 6, 4, or 3 months for themselves and their families. I thought that was a really good point that he made.
Yeah, and I think that chapter that is in the same chapter, and that chapter is like 2 or 3 pages, but has so many salient points,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's a mark of a good writer when you keep on like having these huge points in like small amounts of pages, rather than having to you know which is kind of hilarious that school teaches us how to write fluff, but actual good writing is about getting rid of all of the unnecessary parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually, this is kind of an unrelated point, but that's why I thought it was so funny when Twitter went to more characters, because that's actually one of the things that I like about the platform. One of the very few things now that I like about it is it forces you to say what you're going to say in a limited amount of characters. So I liked that that chapter specifically was so short, but I had to go back and reread some of the lines because I wasn't expecting him to put it that way and just drive the point home in that short amount of time.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a really short chapter.
Yeah, and so he even talks about the necessary versus unnecessary government officials, which I have to point out again just because he doesn't even bring up what makes someone necessary versus unnecessary. Really? Like, what is an unnecessary amount of police? What is an unnecessary amount of tax collectors? What is, unnecessary amounts of anything the government does versus a
One.
necessary amount?
The number is 1.
Um, and it is true that for instance, when it comes to police, security would be provided even without the government. But without the market, you're not going to be able to determine what is necessary and unnecessary. And so it's kind of
It's just an
hand-waving.
obstacle.
Yeah, it's kind of hand-waving to say, oh, this amount of police are unnecessary when you don't know what the market is demanding.
Calculation problem.
Yep. Yeah. And
Right. In a free market, in a completely free market, the police would be proportional to the security that private businesses wanted. Pretty much.
Taco Salad said, I actually got paid to learn how to be an electrician and plumber when I was in the army. Not making an argument for it, just saying. And actually, that would be a point for Hazlitt, saying that if you disbanded the army after wartime, they're all already people in the army that do things that the private industry wants. Like people want electricians, people want plumbers. So it's not going to be this huge tragedy that many people make it out to be.
Yeah. Just one thing that I think it's interesting to add to this thing that he said, which is that government is financing education of certain individuals. In this case, he's talking about the army. So the government is financing that members of the army learn certain skills, which could be useful in the market after they leave the army. But that doesn't mean that the people receiving that education are the most worthy of it. And the best example of this is that a lot of governments finance prisoners, finance inmates to learn skills that would be useful in the market, potentially useful. And it doesn't mean that those inmates are, deserving of such free education, or at least not any more than other citizens.
Right. And with the prisoner example, how does the government know what's going to be needed in the future? I mean, with the army example, it's what the army needs. But with the prisoner example, they're trying to predict what the market will provide in the future. And if you really think about it, anyone who knows this and chooses to go into the government would be giving up millions and millions of dollars that they could make on the market, predicting what jobs would be needed in the future. And instead getting a government position. And so what really ends up happening is the government doesn't predict what the market demands in the future. It just puts people in positions that the market demanded in the past. And so these people can come out with all these skills, but they won't have, it's not necessarily true that they'll be able to get a job, because the government is predicting based on what is in the past and not what is in, they don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, again, economic calculation problem. Sort of.
Yep.
Kind of indirectly, but yeah, it's kind of the same issue.
Yep.
Want to move on to the last chapter then, I guess?
Well, there was something that wasn't said. Well, there's two things that wasn't said. The first is that the purchasing power argument, the reduction of purchasing power by government officials, can be made of a racketeer or robber. His purchasing power is raised with money he takes from you. He supports businesses with his income, but your purchasing power and your support of businesses must fall accordingly.
Yeah, of course. Because the money's coming from the people.
Yep. And sadly, needless bureaucrats aren't often easygoing loafers that just don't do anything, but they're often energetic reformers that are busy encouraging and disrupting production.
Yeah, and usually the people getting paid by the government are going to push for their living standards being increased. So they're going to push for, higher salaries and more privileges. So even if there was a demand for all that work, doesn't mean that it would be worth nearly as much as they actually make, which just makes everything overly expensive and further reduces the purchasing power of the average citizen and how much is going to be reinvested in the economy.
Yep. So now is a good time to get to chapter 10, which is the fetish of full employment.
I love the title of this chapter.
Yeah. He starts by saying that the economic goal of any nation is to get the greatest results with the least effort, and then put it into another way: more production, less labor.
Yep.
This is the reason why people use mules. It's why people make labor-saving devices. It is so elementary, yet so many people making slogans forget it. And then translated into national terms, the real objective is to maximize production.
Yep.
And the
not
maximal,
employment. Like I said
However,
earlier, it would be great if we could have everything without anyone working. Like, having everyone work isn't the desirable goal. Just having enough for everybody is, and that's production. That's not labor.
yep. However, to maximize production, full employment must take place.
Yeah,
But it is a mistake to think full employment is the actual goal, however.
yeah,
Nothing is easier to achieve than full employment when it is the goal and divorced from maximizing production. Primitive society had full employment, but we were so much poorer than today's society.
yeah. And having full employment doesn't mean the people are employed, in the most desirable way, which only the market can decide.
Yep.
Which is the
Even
same
though
example that I gave last week when we were talking about the broken windows and stuff. You could just have everyone be a soldier and you have zero unemployment, but then we had nothing to eat.
Coercion can always provide full employment. Slave gangs in Germany had full employment, for instance. And so that's kind of going along with your statement.
Yeah,
Politicians focus on full employment, not full production, or even full employment and full production. So the end itself is forgotten. Wages and employment are discussed as if there was no relation to productivity and output. For instance, the WPA administrators were applauded for coming up with projects that employed the largest amount of people in relation to the value of the project. In other words, they were applauded for being very inefficient.
Right. They had a job, but they weren't really doing anything that was of any value.
Yep. And the progress of civilization, he even states this as a conclusion, as part of the conclusion. The progress of any civilization has meant the reduction of employment, not its increase. Because we are wealthy, we have gotten rid of child labor and made it unnecessary for millions of women to work.
yeah. So, if you can produce more, hiring less people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah. And the question is not how many jobs there will be, but how much we will produce and how high our living standards will be.
Yeah. Again, it's not the difference between the lowest and the highest. It's just, how well off is everyone.
Yep.
Also, there's the
Yeah.
issue which I think I also talked about last week, which is, when you artificially create employment, those people could be doing something else that is actually more desirable than what they were hired to do by the government. So, by just having everyone artificially hired in order to prop up employment, you're preventing them from engaging in more productive labor.
Yep. And this actually comes this is basically an efficiency argument.
Yep. This is also a pretty short chapter.
Oh, it is. So we started with the longest chapters and it progressively gotten shorter and shorter after chapter 7.
Yeah.
These last two chapters are 7 pages in total.
Yeah.
Yep.
You might as well say 6.5.
Yeah, the
Yep.
last one is one paragraph.
Oh, is it?
On my book it is. The last page of this chapter is just like, less than 10 lines.
Oh yeah.
So it's a really short
It's
chapter.
on mine. It it has half a paragraph, and then like it starts another paragraph, which is one whole sentence,
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
ends it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any go backs? Any things that you wanted to say earlier, but now remember?
I don't think so.
Uh,
Not me, at least.
I'm looking through and seeing if there's anything that.
Maybe
Is there
Mac
anything
has
to
any
stand
other
out?
points she would like to bring up.
Is there anything in chat that they would like us to discuss?
Yeah, if you have anything you want us to talk about, just let us know.
Nobody, nothing.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. I think we should wait a minute or two for chat because they all, I believe, at least 30 seconds behind us.
Yeah.
Taco Salad said they're starting to riot where I live. Hopefully you have your AR-15 and plenty of ammo, Taco. That's all I can say.
In Minecraft.
In Minecraft. Yeah, no, seriously, please stay safe if you are in a riot area. It's not the time to go jogging.
Oh, thank you, Taco, for writing something about the website. We should probably also open it up for any questions, generally.
Yeah. AMA time.
How many people do we have watching anyway? It says 10 on mine.
It says 10 on mine, but there was 11 when we basically stopped talking about the book.
Yeah, I do not have the stream open. I only have the control panel because I closed it so the connection would improve.
Taco Salad said he wrote something for the website. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you just say that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just said that. I just said that and thanked him.
Yeah, if
Yep.
you wrote something, if you wrote anything for the website, just submit it to the email, which I'm pretty sure can be found on the Twitter page at the Hoppean, and
Yep.
it will be reviewed by our editors, one of which is Colton.
Yep. Yep, there was 12 max. Although we'll actually see how many views it got once this
Yeah, it only
taken
shows
off air.
concurrent viewers on the actual stream. When we ended, we can see how many total people showed up, which is cool.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if it's entirely true that it shows that the watching now is accurate.
That doesn't really matter.
Somebody said
Anyway.
Somebody said they think they saw 12 max.
Yep, that's also what I saw. But how accurate that is, I have no idea.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube would start throttling.
Colton, would you maybe want to talk about the publishing schedule of the website, maybe?
Yeah, so the publishing schedule that we're trying to keep is such that you have new articles every Wednesday and Saturday morning. Typically, we'll publish articles sometime during the night. But if you look in the morning, Wednesday or Saturday, you'll find them.
Yeah.
And so that's how we're going to be doing things. And we were failing of doing this when we only had one editor, but I stepped up to become an editor, so that way we can meet these goals.
Yeah, our other editor was just really busy with, real life stuff. So being a team of volunteers makes it a little bit more difficult. But now we have Colton.
Yep. So, also sorry guys, we had to be 30 minutes late. I wasn't able to get those done in time. We'll be fixing that for next week's stream by having Emo help me with this.
Yeah, I'm just glad we didn't have any technical difficulties during the stream this time, which is good. I hope me being the actual host of the stream improved this.
Yep.
Volnost
yeah.
wasn't available today anyways, so he wouldn't have been able to host, but yeah. I hope we have a better quality stream now.
Yep.
He said he got home about, like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes after we started, I think.
Yeah. I mean, he could have totally joined in, but that's in the past now. I think it's been enough time for there to be questions, so I think we should probably end it.
Yeah, we're already at 1 hour 40 in, so it's actually a longer episode than the first one, which is understandable because we had 2 very long chapters to talk about.
Yeah, Taco Salad says most podcasts don't make it past 7 episodes, so hang in there and keep doing your thing. Thanks for the encouragement.
Yep. We already have a list of books, so we probably will get past that.
Yeah, it's just we have to make sure to keep at it, because creating the notes takes me the most time.
Yep.
You know, to try to keep the entire stream on track instead of just going off on tangent land.
Yeah. He's our, admiral.
Yep, so... Oh, thank you,
And
Mario.
I think we should, before we end it, we should probably shield everybody's Twitter again. Because we only did it at the very beginning.
So, all of the Twitter ats are in the image. So it's, I'm Colton. I'm at Hets You Very Much. Emo?
I'm Kyle. I'm at UFFZ Kyle.
Okay, now Emo.
I'm Emo. I'm Emo Hoppean 346.
And I'm Mac, and my Twitter handle is _KenzieBuff. Also, just in addition, for anybody that's watching, because I think we had 15 viewers at one point that I saw. This is a book club, everyone, and I know for a fact that at least Economics in One Lesson that we're doing right now has free PDFs available online if you don't own the book. So if for next episode you want to read the chapters so you can have more discussion in the chat, that's a good thing to do, and it'll be a lot more fun if chat gets involved as well. And of course, it's always great to have everybody read these books along with us, because I think the list that we have so far is pretty solid.
Yeah, we don't go over everything in the books, so it is good for you to read them.
Just adding to what Max said, there's free PDFs for this book. My PDF is available, the PDF that I'm using is available for free on the Mises Institute. Also, Taco asked what book is next. I think Colton is the one to answer that.
I think this is something that's being discussed in back channels, but the book that we have chosen next is The Anti-Capitalistic Mentality. It's a nice short book, and it will allow us to gauge what we should do next. We're also thinking about A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism by Hans Hermann Hoppe, as well as Choice by Bob Murphy.
Yep.
I'm excited for Theory. I enjoyed that book. It was very much the easiest explanation I've understood.
Yeah. I also enjoyed that book, but what's it called? The public's good arguments that get made are always some of the hardest to understand. So I think it would be good to have a explanation video essentially on what the arguments mean. Trying to just go on an overview of them, because it can be very easy to get lost track. At least that's what I found. of like
Yeah.
what exactly the argument is.
Right. So is that it for everything?
I believe so.
Yep.
So next week we're
actually-
going to be doing chapters 11 through 15, right?
I was thinking about that. We'll have to talk about it, but 11 to 15 would probably be the minimum that we would be doing, if not 11 through 17. But we'll post this on social media, on the Hoppean account, and also on at least.
Yeah,
So-
chapter
Yeah, the next
11
few
is a little
chapters.
long, so
Yeah, chapter 11 is really long, but a bunch of them are really short, so
yeah, it kind of makes up for it.
yeah, we'll have to see on how many how many pages we want to do, because with the spreading up of the notes, we'll probably be able to do more pages per week. You know, but we'll have to discuss on how much emo
Yep.
is able to help with the notes. So
Yeah, I'll do my best. I work a lot.
yeah, and so do I. Have a bunch of other things I'm doing. So yeah, 11 through 15 for now. We might add to it later, but we'll see.
All right.
Yeah, actually, we should probably put the link to the book, or at least a link to where you can get the book as a PDF for free in the description, as well as our regular description that we have.
Oh yeah, I can do that. Can you guys fetch me the link real quick?
Yep.
Let me try to do it real quick. You want me to put it in the Discord?
Yeah, just fetch me the link and I'll edit the description here. Oh, maybe we can make a pinned comment as well after the stream goes up.
Mises Institute actually doesn't have a free PDF of it. Interesting.
Do they not? I'm on the page right now. Hold on. I got a free downloads. Oh no, that's just a
Yep, I put it in Discord. Let me put it in chat for everyone.
Oh wait, you did find the PDF for it on Mises?
No, I found it on fee.org. Taco
Okay.
Salad says, "I'll let everyone have a wonderful night. Hopefully the natives don't come to North Palm from West Palm." Yep, I understand what you're talking about, Taco, and I actually am from West Palm Beach County, so root to Florida, man.
Well,
All right.
all right. I think it's
So-
time to cut it off.
Yep.
All right, bye everybody.
Yeah, see ya.
Yep, thanks for tuning in.
See, is it still going on my end?